All right, Dad, it is Friday, August 16th, and I'm not even going to ask about a good news story. Let's just jump straight
Yep.
into,
Yeah. Time to give up on that.
yeah,
Maybe
let's
there'll
just,
be a day. Maybe there'll be a day, but that's not, we're not there
okay,
yet.
we'll make it organic. We won't try to force a good news story.
Okay, exactly.
So, let's start with talking about the Nord Stream pipeline. I've been seeing
Okay.
some news, and
hmm
it sounds kind of like the West is throwing Zelensky and Ukraine under the bus, saying that, oh, this Nord Stream pipeline, where we had all these stories saying that Russia blew up its own pipeline. I don't think a lot of
hmm
people believe that. Maybe not
Yeah.
serious people that
That
are
that
really
was in the
diving
first,
into it.
right, the first couple of months after the explosion. Yeah, they tried
Right.
that and then dropped it. And
Right,
then
and
came
then Seymour Hirsch broke that big
Hirsch, right,
story, yeah, saying that
right.
it was the United States with Norwegian help blew up that pipeline, and that was a big scandal. And of course, it was denied vehemently by the United States. But now the Wall Street Journal's come out with a story saying that, oh, it was Ukraine that did this. So maybe you can just tell us the current situation with this story. What's
Okay.
going on?
Well, I think that I'm confident that the story that Seymour Hirsch broke, back just a few months after the pipeline explosion, was the correct one. Maybe with a few minor details, need to be corrected, but in general, it's the correct. It was the U.S. behind it. It now what happened that story when it was broken by Seymour Hirsch created a panic because that is a huge scandal. It's beyond a scandal. I mean that it's a if acknowledged, if admitted to, by any government in NATO, it would bring about the end of NATO. Because basically it was one member of NATO attacking another member of NATO, namely the U.S. attacking Germany. And it would have brought down the German government. It could have, severely strained, if not just, um, well, ended the good relations between the United States and Europe. Right? It was a so this was something that the cat got out of the bag and they had to get it back in. So what did they do? I remember it was shortly after the story broke, maybe a couple of weeks afterwards, that Olaf Scholz made a, a visit to Washington D.C. It was very odd because there was no explanation for the visit. Normally, there's some stated objective, and then there are press conferences or photo ops or whatever, and there's some pomp and ceremony, when you have a distinguished foreign leader come to, visit the U.S. But no, this was all very hush hush. He went there, spent a couple of days, and then came back to Germany. And then shortly after that, the first story broke about the Ukrainians on the boat. I think it was 5 men and 1 woman on this little yacht that apparently had pulled off the stunt. And the whole thing was just so silly, really, for anybody that has, any appreciation of the difficulties involved. Yeah, this pipeline is 300 feet water in the ice cold Baltic, which is a NATO lake, and right next to an island with that is constantly used by, I think it was a Danish island, and um, basically an outpost of NATO. So to somehow think that like six amateurs, these people, Ukraine doesn't have any sort of the kind of special, like Navy SEALs, the kind of people that you would have. I don't think they're actually Navy SEALs, but you'd have people that were specially trained for deep sea diving and um, could actually, place the explosives correctly. These pipelines are encased in concrete. It's not something that amateurs can do. It's something, when it happened, I mean, immediately the discussion was, well, it had to be a state actor because there's just no way that just a group of terrorists could pull this off. But they claimed to do this. It was all a very silly story. Yeah, I think the boat wasn't even big enough to hold the kind of equipment that they would use to support that kind of equipment. The whole thing just it seemed like people started making jokes about Gilligan's Island and the SS Minnow and so on and so forth, right? And then there were some other stories that came out later about it. They're trying to feed this Ukraine story, and I think it just clearly was a diversion because again the fact that the actual incident was a real threat to to the alliance between the U.S. and Europe. It was a real threat to NATO, and so they had to divert attention elsewhere. They had to point the finger, and and it was convenient. I think it was actually, you could say, the story was silly, but pinning it on the Ukrainians, not the Ukrainian government actually, pinning it on the Ukrainians was convenient. First of all, Ukraine is not a NATO member. You could have um, you could say, well, there was a motive, right? And and then I noticed at the time, when it came out, there are a lot of people that are, you could say, kind of within the pro-Russian camp, kind of started to latch onto this story because they were so very anti-Ukraine. So I think it gave it some legs. It wasn't just within the mainstream, there were, but it was also within the dissident community. So um, but I think people who look at it seriously just saw that it had never made sense. Now, this is just a way to breathe new life into the story. And you notice that it's all very convenient. First of all, these are not, it's not actually um, the government of Ukraine that did it. So you say that Zelensky first gave it his blessing, and then he decided against it. So and then these people went ahead and they did it anyway. So you can say, well, first of all, it was not a NATO country, but it was also not the government that we're supporting. And so it's just these five, six individuals rather, and that's all very. You just take this horrible responsibility and you put it on these individuals who probably don't exist or you'll never be found, and hopefully the story dies there. I think that's the intention.
Hmm. Could you center yourself just a little bit? You're drifting
Okay,
over
yeah.
this way just so we don't have the. Okay.
How's that a little better?
Yeah, that's good. Well,
Yeah,
okay, so if you say that Zelensky did give it his blessing at first and then said, whoops, so let's don't do this, well, then how could the Germany be okay with it, even if they did believe the story that said, oh, Ukraine did this, Zelensky gave it its blessing, let's keep on sending money and
mhm,
equipment to Ukraine, the country that destroyed our energy infrastructure, that committed an act
right.
of war against Germany. How could we support this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the bigger question is that the real question is how could I'm sure the German government knows that the U.S. government did this, and how is it that they remain silent about it? I mean, this shows this is a government that just doesn't have a backbone. This is a country that is just not a serious country anymore, right? Because any country that is concerned about its own sovereignty would not let something like this happen. Now, there are
Right.
people, who are speaking out about this. Like again, there's Sarah Wagenknecht. I don't know how to pronounce German, but it's something like that, Wagenknecht, um, who said, "Okay, well, if this is true, what are we doing supporting Ukraine?" Right? Again, there's an effort to create some kind of separation from the incident. Okay, in this story, between the government of Ukraine and the perpetrators. But still, like you said, according to the story they manufactured, at one point he gave his blessing. Now, the,
Right.
the weird thing is that you have people in Germany that actually were very happy about this, like the Green Party, which is fanatically anti-Russian and doesn't like any kind of fossil fuels, even clean burning ones like gas.
Well, this
But
was a huge act of eco-terrorism, right? If you're a green
yeah,
person, why would you
right,
support?
right,
This was
yeah,
horrendous for the environment.
yeah,
Like,
right,
so,
right, yeah. No, I no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, this should they should have been up in arms about it, but they weren't. I guess it seems like it just shows, like when push comes to shove, it's their Russophobia that in the end is what counts to them, right? Because
but
they'll leave everything gets sacrificed on the altar of Russophobia. Everybody's interest. Oh yeah, we're supposed to be concerned about Nazis. Well, we're not. Let's look the other way because we have a
I
chance
don't
to beat the
know. Right? I
Russians.
mean, the for the Greens, I mean, why would the Greens be Russophobic? I think they're just
But they
stupid. And
are. That's the thing. I know it's stupid, but they are. That's part of what they're all about. I remember a time when the Greens were the pro-peace party, but they started to undergo a transformation in the 1990s. Diana Johnstone, who was a member one time of the Greens, writes about this. She's one of the few. She's a principled leftist who just saw this happening and said, what's going on? Yeah, now, but beginning in the 1990s, early 1990s, they began to travel down this neocon path, and now they're just like more um, rabidly anti-Russian than than the neocons themselves.
So,
It's a
so
very strange phenomenon.
do the Greens? Is it much about environmentalism or reduction of fossil fuels? I mean, or is it
Well,
just
that's
now?
why
It's
they call
like,
the Greens, right? But because of their Russophobia, right? Okay, they no longer have clean natural gas, and they're having to burn coal, But it's just really, that was something they had to start up coal plants, but
well, make it make sense. How did the
it
Greens
doesn't make
decide to?
sense. I'm sorry, it
Did they
doesn't
just
make
wake
sense.
up one day and said, you know what, let's forget about going clean green energy. Let's focus on hating Russia. Like what?
Yeah, no, it
Why?
didn't happen one day. Like I say, it was something that occurred over time, beginning with, maybe the late 1880s, definitely the early 1990s, like with the Serbia war, with the
It,
wars in former Yugoslavia, is what I should say. That's when you began to see it. And but it's a phenomenon that you don't just find with the Greens. I mean, I think you find it in its most extreme form with the Greens, but it's a phenomena that has occurred across the left, right? The left used to be the peace party. The left was the one that believed in talking with, our rivals or even our enemies, right? But no longer. Back in the 70s and the 80s, I think it was in the 1970s that Petra Kelly was the head of the Green Party in Germany, and um, she led a lot of the protests against the missile deployments in in Europe, and helped and because of the efforts of people like her, we got the I think it's the INF treaty, which the U.S. pulled out of recently, unfortunately, and now we're back in the same fix. Actually, things are even worse now. But that's a whole other story. No, it's yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Sorry, 1 second. I got Henrik banging on the door. I need to
Okay,
give me. Sorry, apologies.
okay, no problem.
Hey, buddy, where's mommy? She's upstairs. Upstairs. Okay, you want to say hi real quick?
Hi, Henrik.
Oh, well, okay. Where were we?
Yeah, yeah, we're talking about the Green Party, and yeah, are they really green? Well, I think well
Yeah.
they are. I mean, they take these things very seriously. I mean, they really they're pushing for alternative energies, but their Russophobia is a big part of what they are now. It is, and that often conflicts with their green principles. And it seems like when the two conflict, I think their green principles are very important to them, but in this case, they sacrifice the green, for the sake of opposing Russia. So, like you say, that explosion was an act of eco-terror. It released a huge amount of greenhouse gases, right? Um, and you would think that this was something that they would be up in arms about, but but no, I think they all understand, that it was, well, they know it was directed against Russia. There was that attempt to pretend that Russia was behind it, but that just didn't make any sense to anybody. Um, and for them, opposing Russia is severing all ties with Russia is more important than even these principles which they hold dear.
Yeah, I never really thought Russophobia was a thing or Russophobia
Hmm.
until 2016. But it seems like learning and talking to you that there's always been kind of this deep seated hatred towards Russia amongst a pretty large percentage of the elite for a long time. That
Hmm.
where did that originate from? Is it just Cold War carryover? Because when I was growing up, I never really heard anything really evil about Russia. It wasn't until Trump started making the scene and then they decided to say that Putin was manipulating our elections and then now we have to hate Russia. I felt like that's where it
Right.
started, but it seemed like
Uh,
it's always been around, right?
right. Well, yeah, to some extent. I mean, it is, I think, in part a legacy of the Cold War. Um, but it's more than that. I mean, there was during the Cold War, is what I remember was, yeah, there was certainly hostility for and hatred, well, and fear of the Soviet government, which I think was at least partially, justified. Um, but there was also an appreciation for Russian culture and for, all of Russia's contributions to Western civilization. And now you find the kind of, um, and also respect for for the Soviet Union for its real achievements. For example, it really was the Soviet Union that defeated Nazi Germany. That 80% of, of Germany's casualties were on the Eastern Front. That's where the real war was fought, and the Western Front was almost just a sideshow. And then, the first man in space. We're right here. We're just very close to a place that's called Gagarin Square. There's a statue of Gagarin, who was the first man, the first cosmonaut, right? First man in space. There were real achievements, and people respected them, and there was no problem acknowledging these. But now there's this constant effort to denigrate Russia, whatever, not just you know not just the government, but everything. Again, I think um, the comment by John, yeah, well, how can I forget his name right now? Um,
Bolton,
no, no, not Bolton. Well, Bolton's a Russia hater, but the one who died recently. Um, anyway,
John
I mean,
McCain.
there's John McCain. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah, uh, a gas station masquerading as a country.
Hmm.
That's just typical kind of statements that are made by Russia, and they're just thoroughly untrue. And anybody just gets off the plane and walks around, spends a day walking around Moscow knows it's untrue. Um, but it's constant. This constant effort to denigrate Russia, not just its government, but its people, its culture, everything about it, its economy, and then to demonize Putin. We opposed the Soviet Union. It was our great rival in the Cold War, but I don't remember the demonization of Soviet leaders. The kind of things that you see now about Putin. So yeah, it's a legacy, I think, in part of the Cold War, but there's more to it than that, and I find it hard to understand. Like, yet, why the Green Party should adopt this hatred of Russia? It doesn't make any sense. It's irrational. I think part of it is the fact that Russia is it's one of the few. It's a okay. It's a European society, or at least it's a country with very strong links to Europe. But it hasn't gone along with the new uh, woke way of doing things, right? It's rejected that, and I think that's part of the hatred. It's just like, again, they can forgive um, black and brown people around the world who don't adopt you know gay pride parades or something, but they can't um, forgive rather a European nation that 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 assumes that position. So I think part of it is the culture war that is being extended to and applied to Russia, and Russia is seen as the enemy in that sense as well. And then there's just kind of like pure geopolitics, meaning it's about power. Um, Russia is one of the few countries in the world that really can oppose the United States, can stand up to it, and constrain, um, you know, yeah, constrain the United States, on the world stage in a way that very few other countries can.
Okay, well let me take it back to Nord Stream again. So
Okay,
what do the German people believe? You said that everybody within the German government, they have to know that it was the US that blew up their own
right,
pipeline. And
right.
they just can't
They,
say it because this is an act
yeah,
of war, a NATO country attacking another NATO country. Do the German
right.
people also understand that it was the United States? I mean,
I think some do. I don't know it's been a long time since I've seen any polling. I think there is a minority, a fairly substantial minority, that is aware and is very upset about this. Um,
okay,
but there are a
so
lot of
well,
people that's just kind of that are like in every country. They trust their leaders. These old institutions that they've been committed to, in some cases for generations. They is those old commitments die hard. That old kind of trust in that that authority dies hard too. So it's
Right.
not a, obviously, if there was a majority, I think we would see something like a revolution. There are people there who are angry, but they're not a large enough group and not organized enough to do anything about it.
Right. Okay. So maybe they don't believe that the U.S. did it, but then now the main narrative now is that it was Ukraine that did it. So, which is also not that. Do
Yeah,
most basically what percentage of people believe that it was Russia? Because if it's not Russia, then your options are the U.S. and Ukraine. And
yeah.
if anybody that does a
Well,
deep dive, they know that it's the
right,
United States. I understand
right,
with Ukraine, they say, oh, it was just some people on a yacht, individual kooks that
right.
wanted to do it. But even then, we say Zelensky gave it his blessing in this Wall Street Journals that this was a plan hatched in some capacity with the Ukrainian government. If Zelensky was names attached to it at all, that's a
Right.
problem, right? So
Right. Well, they say
I don't understand.
Zelensky was behind it too,
Okay,
right?
so there you
For
go.
the
The
former,
Zaluzhny,
right,
the head of
right,
the
right,
military, and then Zelensky. We're
right.
both
For
names
the
are in there.
former, right, the former head of the military, now ambassador to the UK. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. The thing is, again, I'm sure that all the governments in the all European governments know what really happened, and they have cooperative media, so they're not playing it up. I think you can't really overstate the power of the media, and there are a lot of people that are just kind of are their viewpoints are shaped by the media. They don't stop and think. Yeah, if you're a thinking person, you hear that and say, "My God," uh, but we got to do something about this. But then if you turn on the TV, it's just mentioned ho hum, and then they go on to another story because they know that this is something that should not be played up. And then their
Oh,
excuses, and then and Zelensky himself says, "Oh no, I didn't have anything to do with it." So people say, "Oh, that's probably they got that part of it wrong." Wasn't it just these six people on a boat? That's all it was.
okay, so why is this story coming up again? Basically Nord Stream has been out of the news cycle for a better part of a year or even longer now, right? It was huge when
Yeah,
it first happened, and there's a come up every now and then. The Tucker Carlson interview brought it up, but now it's coming up again. Are they planning to throw Ukraine or Zelensky under the bus? What's the purpose of talking about this now?
yeah. I think it just, they're just trying to maintain the alternative narrative, feed it again a little bit more, again, actually name an individual. Maybe they know they'll never get a hold of that individual, but it's just convenient just to make the story more convincing. And people do fall for it. I mean, they really, again, even within the dissident um, media. People hear that and then they become further convinced. They forget about Seymour Hersh's work and they become further convinced in this alternative theory. And that's I think that's what the CIA, who really hatched this whole story, wants to happen.
Hmm. I mean, there's even a video of Biden basically saying it.
Yeah,
They asked
I've
about the
heard
Nord
that.
Stream, and he's like, "We have ways of stopping that pipeline." He just straight
Yeah,
up said it on camera.
right. Yeah, he said. Yeah, he promised that it wouldn't happen. That the pipeline was going to be destroyed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. He
and then
promised the
right,
destruction of it, and then
right,
lo and
right.
behold, it happened. So
Right.
it's
And then afterwards, you have these famous neocons celebrating it.
mm,
In fact, there was a famous tweet, that was soon after deleted by uh, the Polish, I guess, like the former foreign minister of Poland, and he showed the picture of the explosion, the great bubble, coming out of the sea, and said, "Thank you, USA," and then it was deleted. But then you have, Ms. Neocon herself. Uh, oh gosh, what am I'm having
Victoria
a terrible
Nuland.
Victoria Nuland, right? Yeah, actually, just celebrating the fact that the junk at the bottom of the sea, just smirking about it. It's clear what happened. And again, it was like if you really look at countries with the capability. Well, first of all, it was right in the middle of this NATO like Baltic Sea, and there's no way that a non-NATO country could have done this. And so it had to be a NATO country, and there are really only a couple that had the capability. One was the U.S., another would be the UK. But according to Seymour Hersh, it was the U.S. was helpful.
It's just crazy that that the stays buried and that everybody in Europe just went along with it. That the
Yeah.
U.S. attacked another NATO country, not just
Yeah.
attacked, destroyed some of the most important energy infrastructure to
Right.
all of Europe.
Right.
That's like
Right. Yeah.
that's a
No, it's
devastating
extraordinary.
attack.
Right. No, no, no. It's extraordinary, and it just shows you. I think it reveals the the very skewed relationship between Europe and the U.S. In other words, the European countries are just vassal states of the U.S. These are not real countries anymore. I mean, any sort of sovereign nation, any any leadership with a sense of its own dignity would be up in arms about it, and um, would break off relation, would exit NATO, whatever. That's what a real country would do. But these are just not real countries anymore. This is okay. They're just member states of the EU, which is subject to U.S. power. I mean, that's what it reveals. If there's nothing else that reveals it, this incident reveals it.
Do you think that it'll stay that way for long? I mean, surely this is not a winning recipe for Europe. It can't last forever. I mean,
No,
they
you
can't
wouldn't
be.
think so, but I mean, it's just amazing it's gone so far. So I don't know how much farther it will go.
Okay, it's unbelievable just to think about that the U.S. attacked Germany and
Yeah,
Germany
yeah,
just you know rolled
yeah.
over and said,
Well, just look at Olaf Scholz or
thank you
listen to
for
him for a few
abusing me.
minutes, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's interesting. Do you feel like there is been an effort now to remove Zelensky? That Zelensky is souring with this Kursk invasion was. Who knows if it was sanctioned? We're in the fog of war. I don't really fully still understand
Yeah,
what's going on there, but I am seeing more negative press coming out regarding Zelensky. Zelensky was trending
right,
on Twitter, and it was all negative, like, oh, Zelensky's in
right.
trouble.
Yeah.
What's your
Well, you
take?
notice actually, I think it, like you argued last time. I think you're correct that um, there was certainly knowledge of uh, and I think almost certainly involvement by NATO in this attack. Um, but it is interesting, and there is um, a lot of the usual kind of rah sort of press releases coming out about this Kursk incursion. You hear, for example, like in just a few days, the Ukraine's army seized more land than it took Russia in more than a year to take in the Donbass and that kind of stuff. But in the more serious publications, yeah, they try to give it a positive spin, but you don't have to read too far into the article where you start to see the doubts about the wisdom of this. And they say, it's not clear that they can hold on to this land, and they did so by pulling much needed troops off of off the line in Donbass, and and then either even some, actually just much more openly negative articles. I think it was in a German publication. This could be the end of Ukraine. So there's been a lot of criticism. It's true of this particular um, military adventure, and more so than in the past. I think, like for example, the summer offensive of last year was was clearly a disaster, but the Western media worked hard to give it a positive spin, all the way through. In the end, there was some acknowledgement that yeah, it did not succeed. In other words, it failed miserably. It was a disaster, but they generally didn't come out and say that. And during the time they tried to play up, Ukraine took one tiny village, and it seemed like it was, like D-Day or something. It turned out it was nothing. But again, this time you're not seeing that. You do see it. Let's just say there's kind of this. I would say this sort of low IQ, or not necessarily low IQ, but let's say the kind of the low attention news consumer kind of news, and they're you're getting these very positive headlines and that kind of news. I see it in my MSN feed or Google feed and all the time. But in the New York Times and a lot of the more serious publications, you are seeing some really serious criticisms of this, which you did not see before. So it may, like you say, indicate a souring Zelensky, because also since it's been leaked that Zelensky was the one that pushed hard for this, actually against the wishes of his own military, and I assume probably against the wishes of NATO advisors too. Um, so yeah, there is some rumor that they're looking at a replacement for him. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Have you also heard anything about Sersky potentially going up against Zelensky and defying him? I've heard just a few rumors that Sersky is not happy and that,
Yeah,
I
I haven't
mean,
seen so much. Sersky, has a reputation for being very obedient, and it's said that that's really the reason that he replaced Zelensky. Zelensky was independent-minded. Sersky, is generally an attack dog. I mean, he does what Zelensky tells him to do. Um, but there has been criticism directed against Sersky, kind of increasing criticism. So he may be, again, you got to pin these failures. They're again trying desperately, and I think Sersky's among them, trying desperately to play up the Kursk incursion and to portray it as a great success. And they may be able to pull that off for a few more days, or maybe even a few more weeks. But eventually, I would think definitely within a month or maybe a couple months' time, the whole thing everything that they've taken, they took in this incursion, will be back under Russian control, and then people will stop talking about it, or if they do, it will be acknowledged to be a failure. And again, and Sersky will just have nothing. See, the thing is, since Sersky took power, and that he took it right, shortly before the fall of Avdiivka, if I remember correctly, there's been just nothing but bad news coming from the front. And now this is one, yeah, he can maybe pretend this is good news, but I don't think he's going to pretend very long. And in the end, I think he'll probably be a scapegoat or very possibly a scapegoat for worsening situation on the front for Ukraine.
yeah, we talk about these conflicts constantly and we talk about, the number of casualties or civilian deaths and, it's very kind of removed from the actual death and destruction because I was just seeing on Twitter just some of the Kursk incursions, like obviously I do not support the Kiev regime at all, and these people that invaded Kursk and they committed terrorist acts, shot a pregnant woman, an ambulance, this type of thing. It's awful, but I saw videos of these guys running through the woods, being hunted down, and getting blown up, and it's so horrific. I hearing this,
Yeah,
they take cover, and I
right.
hear this Ukrainian soldier screaming for his mother over and
Yeah,
over
yeah,
again,
yeah,
and it just then eventually gets quieter and quieter. Just the horror
yeah.
of war.
Right,
People need to be reminded of it. I think it's
right,
such an awful
right.
thing to see and listen. And
Yeah,
this and we take sides like, yeah, let's go Ukraine,
right,
screw
right,
Russia, or yeah, let's go
right,
Putin or whatever. And people kind of forget just how horrific it is that that's
right,
somebody's son. That person
right,
maybe had kids himself, had a wife,
right.
and to die in such a horrible, horrific
Yeah,
way for nothing. That's the thing.
right,
And this is
very
just a
true.
microcosm. This is just one
Right.
boy I heard
Yeah,
screaming and dying
right.
for his mother and
Yeah,
dying. And we talk about 2,000 casualties a day now on the Ukrainian
yeah,
front. So people that are saying that they're pro-Ukraine, this is not pro-Ukraine. This is just
mm,
killing what few men are left in Ukraine. If you have any compassion, you have to stop this idea that we got to fight to the last man. They don't want to fight. We've talked about this before. I saw a video yesterday of a van rolling up and grabbing a guy off the street of Odessa and throwing him in. He's screaming and trying to fight him. This it's just, and then what might happen is what I saw this kid screaming for his mother in the woods just in a couple of weeks. This is not helping Ukraine. This is not saving Ukraine. This war is clearly over, and we just keep it going. We just say you got to keep fighting for what?
mhm,
Just so that maybe it will help Kamala in the election. I don't know. It's just it's evil is what it is. And then
mhm.
we see what's happening in the Middle East. You see kids just being blown up, and and people just get so rah. Yeah, go Israel. You got to kill, turn them all to glass. I get comments on that on our videos. Yeah, we just turn them all into glass. Just bomb them, and it's just I don't know how I as much as it's horrible to see these atrocities of war, I feel like they need to be put more front and center instead of us just talking about, oh, there's an incursion. Yeah, there
Yeah,
were
right.
2,000
Yeah,
men here, this, and to see just how awful it is. And we're
yeah,
expanding it. That's the problem. Now we're creating that, you see that microcosm of death and pain, and we're just multiplying it every day by not wanting to stop these conflicts. Like we it's a sad state of affairs, and people are getting swept up on as like it's a big football game instead of
yeah.
realizing that these are real people that are dying horrific deaths that had their whole lives ahead of them.
Right.
It's
No, no,
just
you're completely right. Yeah, sometimes, yeah, I have to remind myself of that. We talk about the horror of Gaza, um, but there is a horror of Ukraine. It's different. Um, Again, the Gaza war is a war waged by Israel largely against civilians, and that's a particular kind of horror. The war in Ukraine is more of a traditional war waged between armies, but it's still a horror. You're right. I mean, it's not it's it's still a tragedy that all these young men are dying. Um, it's a terrible tragedy.
half
Um,
a million
yeah,
Ukrainians, right, are
right,
dead. Like that's
right.
so many. Like, I mean, we see what is happening in Gaza. I mean, according to the Lancet, maybe we're around 200,000 now. Who knows what the actual? And it's horrific, but
Right.
it's a
It could
lot in
end up being a
Ukraine.
lot more than half a
Of
million.
course,
Right.
right? It's more horrific in Gaza because we're talking about a lot of women and children. But I mean, these are young boys as
Right.
that a lot of them don't want to fight. That
Right.
they have a right to live too,
Yeah.
and we just say, oh, it's all Russia, it's all Russia. It's like, no, there's been ample opportunities for peace. Russia keeps on trying to give offers to negotiate again and again and again and again, and we keep on shutting them down. And we have Lindsey Graham saying, "You got to find more men. Keep on fighting. I'm so proud of you. Look at what you've done." It's just sick. Like that guy. If
Yeah.
there's anybody that deserves to be in hell, it's somebody like Lindsey Graham
Yeah.
and Netanyahu.
Netanyahu. I was going to name Netanyahu too.
Netanyahu's got a special seat down there, I think.
Yeah, right, right. No, no, it is a
Uh,
horror, and you're very right to bring it up. I'll notice, I follow the Slavyangrad Telegram channel, and it's um, often there are images. Fortunately, they're blurred out. You have to, click on the image to actually uh, see the bodies, because that's usually what it is, or the Ukrainian soldier being killed. I never do it. I just and sometimes, okay, it's not. Yeah, sometimes you get these kind of celebratory comments, like more Ukrainian militants go to meet Bandera or something. It's kind of describing it in a somewhat humorous way, and I never think that's appropriate.
no, no, yeah.
You say that this is a tragedy. No, I can understand, you know, this why this war needs to be fought, because it really is an existential struggle, especially for those people in eastern Ukraine, who it, it who need to who are or who have been subject to this horrible, Kiev, Nazi or Banderite, I think is probably the best way to put it, Banderite regime that really does want to snuff out their culture, and if they resist, has no qualms about killing them. I mean, again, we had another attack on Donetsk city, constant, shelling. It just shows there is that murderous element. There is a genocidal impulse, yeah, on the Ukrainian side too, and those people have to be protected, but it is done at great cost. Not everybody by a long shot. I would say probably the great majority of those Ukrainian soldiers are just normal human beings, no better or worse than the Russian soldiers that they're fighting. There is a there is a minority that holds a disproportionate amount of power. The Banderites, who really are homicidal maniacs, and but they're not all of Ukraine.
Right.
And yeah,
Unfortunately,
we shouldn't celebrate the death of the average
yeah.
Ukrainian soldier. It is a
No, no.
tragedy.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. My heart was really, yeah, it
Yeah,
was wrenching seeing it, and
right.
these Ukrainians die in such horrific fashion. Um, yeah, let's pivot over to the Middle East a little bit. Um, I actually want to talk to you a little bit about the American bases in the Middle East. Why are they there? What are they doing in the Middle East? Like we're in Syria and Iraq, and both of these places, both the governments said you're not allowed to be here, get out. So they're there
Right,
illegally by all
right,
international law, whatever. But we're
right.
still there. And are they protecting American interests? What is their function right
Okay.
now?
Well, I would say in Syria, it's just a matter of weakening um, the Assad government. That's what it's all about. They've seized actually, the most economically productive part of the country, where the wheat is grown and the oil is pumped, and they've just stolen it, in obvious
When you say they, you mean America has just stolen?
the U.S., yes, in an obvious violation of international law. This is a poor country that was, ripped apart by civil war and is trying to rebuild, and it's hard to, when the world's greatest superpower, takes your most productive region and just seizes it and keeps it
Well,
away from you.
what are we doing
That's
with
what.
it? Are we just taking it and the
Oh,
wheat and
yeah,
stuff and sending it back home, or selling it and
yeah,
cashing out?
yeah.
What's
Well, that's what actually Donald Trump said. We're just going to take the oil. I don't know what the economic. I think it's not so much that we're making any money off of it, but we're just depriving the Assad government, of a source of income. The stated objective, you would say, would be to fight ISIS, and it's clear that again, actually, the Assad government has shown itself very capable of fighting ISIS. In all those parts of the country where a foreign power is not occupying it, it has driven ISIS away with the help of Russia, and it could easily do that in that part of the country too. Now, of course, there's this alliance with the Kurds, but it's there's the Kurds have this dream of independence, right? They're found in different countries in Iraq and Turkey and in Syria, um, and they're a minority in each one of these countries. So they have this hope, which I think the U.S. plays on, of somehow becoming independent someday, but it's not going to happen. And the best thing is to just return to the become a part of Syria again. Again, Kurds were not persecuted. I don't think anybody's even claimed that. And um, and they have been part of Syria. Well, they're within the legally recognized, internationally recognized borders of Syria, and that's where by any sort of any understanding of international law, of international practice, international precedent, those borders should be reestablished. But uh, we're ignoring it. It's just for just because I think again we probably both want to weaken the Assad government and we want to prevent the Russians from having a victory in Syria because the Russians, clearly helped Assad um, to save that part of Syria where we're not stationed and Turkey is not stationed. Turkey has basically the northwest and we've taken the northeast.
So, has there been much resistance to push? I mean, do we recognize the Assad government, or are we kind of
Oh,
pulling like,
yeah, no, we're doing whatever we can. We've imposed sanctions on it. We're doing whatever we can to weaken Assad. And I
well,
think this
why do
again
we
is
hate Assad? What's the reason?
it, like everything in the Middle East, it comes down to Israel. Assad is like Iran, has been a consistent proponent of Palestinian rights and has always, has always been a consistent opponent of Zionism. And so there has been an obsession within Israel and among, neocons in the United States with destroying or uh, of overturning, the Assad government and installing a friendly regime.
Okay, so that's the only reason. And then Russia though has bases in Syria as well. Russia
Right,
and Syria.
we do. Yeah, they
So
do.
is this a potential hotspot then? I mean, we got
Well,
Russia and the United
potentially,
States
right.
both there. I
I
mean,
yeah, potentially, of course. Now there have actually been efforts um, to avoid conflict between the U.S. and Russia. I think they actually have set up channels, and they call them what deconfliction channels. There have been some close calls. There have been times when Russian soldiers have been killed and vice versa. I think it's mostly Russian, but it's
Were the Russians killed by us?
yeah. But okay, I'll have to go back. This was several years ago. Actually, I think it was Wagner. There were a number of Russian mercenaries that were killed. I don't know quite how many, but it was a significant number. Um, I don't remember how that actually played out, so forgive me. But there was, I think, partly because of that incident, there was a recognition that, this could flare up, and both sides agreed that they didn't want it to flare up into a U.S.-Russia war. So they do have these established channels of communication, and they've worked out certain routines, like, okay, our planes could go there, your planes go there. Um, Again, Russia is there at the invitation of an internationally recognized government, right? There's nothing there, so their presence there is entirely legal. The U.S. presence is illegal. It's clearly just it's kind of piracy, right? They're there. They've seized the land, and but it's a fact. They've now. I've heard that the U.S. is going to withdraw from bases in Iraq, and if they I think within 2 years. Let's see if it really happens. Um, I think it might because there must be a lot of people within the Pentagon who realize that these bases are really a liability. They're targets for Iran and for various militias in the area. Um, but if the Iraq bases go and the U.S. pulls out of Iraq, I think that makes things more difficult um, for the occupation of northeastern Syria because partly they were supplied through Iraq. We'll see.
Well, 2 years is a long time. I mean, we're looking at potentially a major regional war breaking
Right.
out in the next couple of weeks. I mean, it could be tomorrow, and
Yeah.
and then let's say when the Iran eventually retaliates, and we are sending doing whatever we can. Our planes are taking off bases in Syria and Iraq, shooting down these Sidewinder missiles, and then Israel does its retaliation, goes full on and starts shooting missiles every which direction, Lebanon, Syria. Do you think that Russian bases that are in Syria, for example, planes will take up into the sky to try to shoot down those missiles and defend Syria? I mean, and then at what point will Israel or the U.S. say, well, maybe we need to take out these Russian bases? All of a sudden, they're part of the war, and then boom, just like that, we're in
Yeah.
World War III. Is that possible?
Well, it's certainly possible. I think there's actually both sides are going to try to avoid it, but it's certainly possible, and
Yeah,
especially when you
both.
have, yeah, especially when you have a country like Israel that just seems to be as entirely reckless. They may try to yeah, again expand the war through in any way they can. Who knows?
Yeah, you
I
say
don't
both
think it'll
sides are
happen.
trying to avoid it, but the U.S. is doing a pretty shitty job of avoiding it. They're constantly
Yeah, well,
moving closer and closer and closer,
yeah,
and they let
yeah,
Israel do
yeah.
whatever it wants.
Right.
They can
I know.
bomb who
I
they
know.
want, do whatever
Right.
will protect them. So it's just the
Yeah.
way it's going. Israel wants World War III. Netanyahu, I
Right.
mean, and Zelensky's also
Yeah.
panicking on
Well.
the end. He
Yeah.
needs World War III too. These are both
Yeah.
of our guys, and they're the ones that are pulling the U.S. chariot. I mean,
Yeah.
are
Okay. Well.
these
Well, I would say no. Zelensky really isn't. He doesn't have the kind of power that Netanyahu does. Netanyahu really can call the shots. Zelensky he's not without power. He has his own agency, but he can't call the shots the way that Netanyahu can. He wouldn't get the 58 standing ovations.
I
I
guess
just
the
can't have
problem
that,
is,
right?
yeah, okay, I
But
stand corrected. But the
yeah,
problem
yeah,
is that NATO
yeah,
is determined
yeah.
to do this. The
Uh-huh.
U.S. establishment
Yeah.
wants this war to continue in Ukraine.
Well,
You know,
okay, okay, in Ukraine, yeah, definitely, but
but they
not
don't
in
want
the
the
Middle
war to
East.
right. So
Yeah, they
we're
don't,
pushing
but
this.
right, but the
We can
problem
end.
is they can't
Yeah,
say no to Netanyahu.
right,
So
right.
there is part of them. So they're just incoherent. I think they really don't want a war with Iran. They've shown that in the past again and again. They've tried to avoid it. they come close to it. And I think again they do want to avoid it, but they've got this, this man in Israel, Netanyahu, is telling him to do things which clearly could very well draw them into a war with Iran. That's where
Mm.
we are. Well, I think actually I probably should go. I
Yeah.
think we're
Okay. Me too.
almost at bed about now.
Right. Okay. Okay. Then let's call it. We'll stop it here. All right. Have a good weekend, Dad.
Okay,
Okay. Bye bye.
bye.